All right, we're back live tonight. You're in Focus, and thanks for staying on. While South Africans struggle with daily power cuts, ministers and their deputies are spared from the ordeal. Thanks to taxpayers, a Sunday Times report states that millions of rands have been spent on alternative power sources for President Ramaphosa's cabinet members. Public Works and Infrastructure Minister Sihle Zikalala recently told Parliament that more than 5 million rand was spent on water and electricity bills for ministers residing in Pretoria. And for more on this, we are now joined by COSATU's Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks and political analyst Sandile Swana. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time tonight here in Focus. So according to the answer to the question raised by the Democratic Alliance, the department saying taxpayers are spending close to 54.9 million rand paying the water and electricity bills at state-owned official residences in Cape Town and in Pretoria. But more so, 29.2 million was spent on homes of ministers and deputy ministers in Pretoria. This also included 7 million spent procuring and installing alternative power supply to their houses, while the rest of us are living in the dark. Matthew, I suppose the first question would be, should ministers be paid the same, I suppose, as the average voter, the average worker in South Africa, and not be getting all these perks?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me. No, I think the simple answer is yes, they should be paying. We have no problem with ministers getting state accommodation because most ministers will never be from Pretoria, the administrative capital, or Cape Town, the legislative capital. They'll come from Limpopo, from Mpumalanga, KZN, etc. So yes, when they take this job, and ministerial positions are normally not that long, 4 years, 5 years, etc. So there's no problem with them having state accommodation, that's fine. But for things like utilities, electricity, water, etc., they should pay like everybody else has to pay. People who rent accommodation, who rent flats in the cities for work, they have to pay utilities. They may not own their property, but they pay. And I think also ministers are not earning a poverty wage. They're earning a very, very nice salary, about 2.4 million rand, give or take. And they have a huge amount of perks which accompanies it. And I think when people are struggling across the country, they want to see the leaders also feeling the pinch, because the decisions of their leaders has a consequence upon the lives of workers who live in Soweto, who live in KwaMashu or Mitchell's Plain, etc. And of course, when government has been telling public servants, your nurses, your police officers, your home affairs staff, your teachers, etc., that they should be tightening their belt because the state doesn't have the money, it sends a very bitter pill to those public servants who are really struggling, who are highly indebted, that they should compromise when politicians don't even bother to pay rent or utilities. So I think for us it's the wrong message. Politicians need to lead by the front, lead by example, and pay what needs to be paid.
Yeah.
No one is asking them to do anything unfair otherwise.
But are ministers, politicians tone deaf to the growing public anger over the freebies that ministers and deputy ministers are getting? And of course, as you're saying, public servants' anger as well at the fact that their salaries are being cut while deputy ministers and ministers are living in luxury. Are they not hearing this?
I think they are tone deaf, to be honest. So a minister might say, well, it's not their decision, it's the president's decision, or it's the recommendation of the Public Office Remuneration Commission. But they need to set an example. They need to say in cabinet, we will not accept such perks. They need to also make sure as individual ministers, because often you find some ministers do pay what is due, and that's good. You might find many ministers, often sadly a huge number of them, don't pay even a simple, modest contribution towards rent. So they need to be much more circumspect. Equally, the issue of ministerial cards has been an embarrassment for many, many, many years. Ministers who come to office promising to lead by example, the minute they get into office, they go and choose a very luxurious car, which is not necessary. We're not saying ministers must drive broken buckies. That's fine. But they can afford to be modest when people are really struggling. We have seen an example of ministers who refuse to buy new cars, who have chosen to buy modest cars. That's what they should be doing. Yeah. But we think there's a need to overhaul the ministerial handbook, take it out of the hands of politicians, have a much more transparent, much more modest and accountable approach, because right now the system is infuriating voters and workers, and it really sends a very wrong message to ordinary South Africans.
Yeah. That is why should they be driving brand new cars? I mean, if their salary can afford them a bakkie, they must as well drive the bakkie. I mean, why shouldn't they be earning at least the same as the average voter that puts them into office?
Thank you, Thabo, and to your viewers. The first thing that all of us, including the trade unions, have to attend to is the philosophy of public service. In other words, what are the principles that guide us to say, when you are a public servant, this is what you must earn, these are the benefits you must get? What is it all about? I'll make examples of this. For instance, in Sweden, ministers travel in public transport. That gives them an opportunity to inspect the condition of public transport every day and to make decisions that impact positively on public transport. They don't have to hear, like, for instance, our ministers do walkabouts to say they want to get in touch with the public. They don't participate and be fully immersed in public transport. For instance, FW de Klerk in 1988, we're talking transport here. 1988, he introduced the unregulated and unscheduled taxi service in the black communities. I am almost certain that de Klerk died never having been inside a taxi or standing anywhere looking for a combi taxi. Never participated in any taxi war. And that taxi industry is a criminal industry, and black people in their majority are subjected to it. I'm not sure if Cyril Ramaphosa knows anything whether he's used that transport on a regular basis. So, but the Blade in Zimande, who's not being mentioned by name here, bought a big BMW 7 Series. That is the transport that with a chauffeur and so on and so forth. So there is a disjuncture between the day-to-day experience of our politicians, unlike in other countries that are more prosperous than South Africa, where people use bicycles, where people in the most senior position use public transport. At the same time, as you know, there are only about 10,000 matric students out of more than 800,000 students. 10,000 go to private schools. And most of our cabinet ministers send their children to be in that top 10,000 students in private schools, not in Siseko Primary School in White City, Jabavu, Soweto. Yeah. And that makes them totally divorced, and they can make any arbitrary policy, any arbitrary budget decision, because their children are immunized and cocooned and cottonwooled by the money of the South African citizens.
So let's talk about that ethos of a public servant. I mean, one would say, well, politicians, others would argue, work harder than us, people in the media, and maybe yourself as an academic. They work harder, and therefore they deserve to be paid the amounts that they're being paid and the benefits that they get. What exactly are we paying the ministers for, so that we can understand what I suppose justify the kind of amount they get paid and the benefits and the perks that they are getting?
The problem that we have is an HR problem on the one hand and a philosophy problem on the other. When I say HR problem, there are things that are called job evaluations and things like that, techniques of saying, can we evaluate this job? And then after that, you evaluate the performance of the person who is occupying that job at a point in time. Our ministers have been getting larger and larger perks over time, especially the last 15 years, when the country, whether you are taking data from Statistics SA, taking data from AG, the Auditor General of South Africa, the Human Sciences Research Council, the top universities, every indicator of progress is pointing downwards. We are in an accelerated retrogression as a nation. They are underperforming, but their incomes and benefits are escalating. I mean, Ramaphosa was caught trying to remove the limit on the utilities bill. I think it was 5,000 per person per month. He wanted to remove the cap altogether so that they can use any amount of utilities, water, etc., etc., etc. So the job that they are doing can be measured. It can be known what it is, and it can be known what its fair value is, and therefore what is the fair compensation. And there are other countries that have done this thing and done it well, to the point that as a minister, even as a state president, you experience life in a manner that the median citizen feels. You feel the same way as them. For instance, it would be nice if these ministers were catching the taxes with us.
Yeah.
And also feel how strong the security and policing is in South Africa at first and at close quarters.
Yes, yes.
Then they would make very sober decisions about the policy.
Yeah. I'll come back to that argument on security in a moment. But Matthew, let's bring you in here. I mean, you saying the people who determine these perks and this remuneration should be people who are not politicians, so it should be taken away from the hands of politicians. I mean, if I were to ask you, who would you compare our ministers' salaries to? I mean, when you look, I suppose, senior managers, CEOs, chief financial officers, who would you compare what they're earning to? And in terms of the work that they are doing, is it worth that amount?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's always a difficult thing to determine who should get paid what. I think we shouldn't put politicians on a pedestal. So your only question about, people might say, well, ministers work very hard. And sure, those who are good ministers, and there are many ministers who are generally good, who do good work on the ground with workers, etc. Sure, but I think equally if we're going to take that principle, then we should say that, well, who works harder than mine worker who works 1 or 2 kilometers underground in very difficult conditions? Who works harder than a nurse filling 2 or 3 vacancies in the public service under very trying conditions, or a police officer who risks their life to protect the nation from serious criminals? So I think for us, everybody needs to be paid a fair living wage. But this is taxpayers' money. This is workers' monies. Everybody contributes to the taxes, no matter how little you might earn. And there needs to be a sense of modesty from politicians. In 1994, when Madiba became president, the argument was that, well, pay politicians a decent or a very good wage, to be honest, so that they don't need to become corrupt. Unfortunately, that has proven painfully not true. We have real lack of ethics amongst some of the top leadership across the country, across political party lines. We need to have a much more modest approach to life. And it can't be that you get a salary of 2.4 million rand, you get a free car, then you still have some politicians fighting for additional perks. Some of the provisions for the ministerial handbook, and again, we don't have a problem with providing ministers with a car or with a house, but let the government provide those. Let the government make sure you pay for your rent, your utilities. Let the government make sure the car is a modest car. But when you have ministers fighting for their spouses to get free plane tickets, when you have a ministerial handbook which says that, well, even after you've left cabinet or left parliament, you'll get so many free flights for a year for you and your spouse, for your kids, that sends a very wrong message. It can't be correct to say that, well, a minister's wife needs to fly with them to New York, because the wife has got no function in going with the minister. She's not a state official, or the husband to be non-sexist. And again, when the state is bleeding, when the state really lacks resources to make sure learners in the Eastern Cape have decent toilets, and police stations in Limpopo are really dilapidated, then we shouldn't be pampering an elite group of people. And again, I think, Sandile is correct to say, do we have a performance assessment of our politicians? And sadly, we don't. The president and even the previous president had all promised to hold ministers accountable, that they have an annual performance assessment card, etc. We've yet to see those. But what you can see is that many ministers have allowed the portfolios to deteriorate, to collapse under their watch. And then why should you then be rewarding such politicians who have really put the nation into many of the crises we face today with this kind of lifestyle luxury? We're not saying pay people peanuts, but there needs to be a fair balance. There needs to be a sense of humility and modesty when you deal with the public's taxes and when workers are really struggling on the ground.
Dr. Swana, I'm staying with that question. You're saying there should be a way of evaluating performance. What are we really paying for? And how do we determine what they're worth? Matthew says, well, if you're a really good minister, you do work really hard, and therefore you shouldn't necessarily be paid peanuts. But what are we paying for?
Let me make 2 preliminary points. I've just been looking at a list of what do doctors get paid, specialist doctors. If you're looking at our state hospitals, you're a doctor. From the list I'm looking at, if you're a cardiologist, heart specialist of some sort, you'll get 131,000 rands a month. Now, others get less than that, and so on and so forth. So they are nowhere near what a cabinet minister earns in actual doctors. And I think our doctors work extraordinarily hard, but they don't compete with our politicians. So that already tells you a story that the salary of a politician is determined by the collective greed of the politicians themselves, among themselves, not the work that they actually do. We can come to this job that they are supposed to do, which has not been done for the past 15 years. The second preliminary point I would like to make is that I've looked at what do other state presidents, for instance, heads of state, earn around the world. For instance, if I read the data correctly, it appears to me that the South African state president earns more than the president of Korea, head of state of Korea, South Korea. South Korea is miles and miles ahead of the prosperity that they enjoy in every area compared to South Africa. South Africa, the GDP per capita has been declining when people like Korea have been escalating, shooting the lights out. Many of the nations that are more prosperous than South Africa, their heads of state and ministers are earning less than South Africa. So now, if you are to then say those people who are doing the job and doing it better, maybe 10 times better than South Africa, elsewhere are being paid less or equal to South Africa, then what are these ones actually being paid for? So what do ministers get paid for? They get paid for making sure that the real wages of the workers and the real GDP per capita, in other words, your standard of living, your ability to afford life, no matter what your name is in South Africa, every year is getting better. And that has not happened in a very long time. They are paid to make sure that you get an education that is competitive with the world. South Africa, among African countries, is usually in the bottom two when tests are being taken by the actual students, especially the black students. So the leadership skills of formulating strategies and policies and then making sure that your administration of professionals every day is executing on those policies to the benefit of the citizens. That job is actually not being done in South Africa. Yes, although the results are pointing downwards, it's hard. I don't know of any ministry that I want to favor to say they are doing a good job, because our standard of living is actually dropping and has been dropping for a long time. Yes, some of them come from the socialist side, the communist side, the trade union side, and other sides that we may want to favor. But the truth of the matter is that these are the people who control the macroeconomy of South Africa, the monetary economy of South Africa. And both of those systems are delivering consistently disastrous results. Yeah. We are hungry. South Africans are hungry. We are starving.
So one of the things, Matthew, that are top of the list in terms of what ministers, deputy ministers get is VIP protection. Now, there are citizens who are arguing that they shouldn't be getting security when the rest of us are living in the fear of crime. Now, ministers might even look at trade unions and say, even your leaders as trade unions are getting VIP protection these days. Why would ministers not be getting that security? Do ministers need to be getting the security at the cost that it's coming at?
Yeah. No, thanks. And that's something we've been raising for quite some time as COSATU. Sure, president, head of state needs security because of the importance they play in society. But I feel at times the security has been over the top. It tends to grow more and more as the years pass on. It really tends to be unnecessary and exaggerated. We don't know why would a deputy minister of arts and culture, who none of us here can name, would need a couple of bodyguards to follow them all over the place, a car themselves and a squad vehicle following them. There's countless examples. And it's not just a cabinet. It goes down to premiers, to MECs, to mayors, etc. I think to give a macro perspective, often at times what we pay for VIP bodyguards competes with what we spend on land reform projects which can benefit hundreds of thousands of people in rural areas, farm workers, etc., who really need access to land. Yet we equate that importance to providing protection to about 250, give or take, politicians, the senior officials of the state. So we think for us, it's unnecessary, it's exaggerated. As COSATU, just a small correction. So COSATU leadership doesn't have bodyguards. At times they might share a driver amongst themselves when they go to a meeting, but by and large they don't have bodyguards. I think your point, though, Thabo, is correct. And what Sandile is saying, the more politicians live the lives of ordinary people, the better we'll have in them responding to the challenges that ordinary people face. Because if you live in a protected estate, you drive in a car with a police escort, you have private medical care, private schooling, private security, everything is private in your life, then you don't experience the real pain that ordinary workers who depend upon the state to provide them essential public services experience. I think for us, the sooner you can have an equalization of society, the better. If politicians send their children to public schools, went to public hospitals themselves, went to the police stations themselves to lay charges, as Sandile is saying, even experienced taking trips on metro rail, etc., then I think you would see a greater urgency by themselves. I think it's quite ironic in that same articles, governors spent a huge amount of money, millions, providing generators to ministerial houses so they don't feel the pain of load shedding. And again, that's wrong because they need to experience what the rest of society experiences. And if they want to get generators, perhaps they should pay for it themselves like the rest of society.
Yeah. So do you think, Matthew, if, for example, there were less perks, it would, in a sense, diversify the intake to the extent that we'll get less greedier people? Because it does seem that the perks also attract the greedy bunch that want more and more. If we were to say, well, being a minister is the same as, suppose, an ordinary worker. You'll continue to drive your bakkie. If it's worn out, you'll take it for service, buy new tires. But there is no 800,000 rands that you're going to get to buy a new car. Would that at least help us sift some of the more genuine people who want to come in and really serve the people in public service?
Look, we think we would hope it would do so. We think also to send a message to the public that government takes apply to the public more seriously, that it takes the managing of limited fiscal resources much more seriously, that it sends a message of modesty to the rest of society, which has had to tighten its belts time and again. At times we need to take out some of these perks from the choice of ministers. So ministers should not be allowed to have any choice about the vehicle they use. There should be a government garage pool of cars that are at the disposal of government officials to use for official reasons. They should have one standard, etc. Similarly with regards to any other perks or support facilities, etc. Again, often we forget to realize that how many staff ministers get to appoint into their offices. That was part of the outcry last year when ministerial staff were increased from 11 to 15 and deputy minister staff were increased from about 6 to 11. And yet the very same government has been complaining about a bloated wage bill, a bloated public service, has been freezing countless nursing and teaching and doctors and police officer posts left, right and center. At the same time as the cabinet size has grown over the past decade plus, we've seen the headcount of the South African police service shrink from over 200,000 to about 170,000, yet population levels and crime levels have risen. So it does show a misplaced sense of priorities by many politicians, not all, but many. And again, we need to send the right message to them that they have to be much more sensitive to what society is doing. And they shouldn't forget that we have elections every 5 years, and if they continue to irritate members of the public will simply retrench them at an election next year. And it's in their own best interest to be much more respectful to the frustrations that ordinary members of the public feel all the time.
All right, so have a look at what you're saying tonight on WhatsApp 072110584. Anonymous saying, this one saying, hi Thabo, they are citizens of South Africa. We should all be subjected to load shedding. Perhaps that will give them a feel of what we as ordinary citizens are facing. Do send them through 072110584. We'll read more of those when we come back from the break as we wrap up the conversation. Sandile Swana and Matthew Parks staying with us. Back tonight, what are we paying for as we're paying ministers and deputy ministers, and is it worth what we are paying? We're taking your thoughts, 072110584, otherwise tweeting us tonight at Newzroom 405. Political analyst Sandile Swana and COSATU Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks are staying on tonight. Dr. Swana, we've touched on this a little bit, and you've already went in that direction, maybe a little bit more, but is the president solely the one in charge of what goes into this ministerial handbook, or is this a team effort?
From the complaints that I heard, it was that aspect of him thinking that he is solely responsible for that book has been challenged by other members of parliament, and they've called for oversight. And Matthew here from COSATU has also said, in fact, it must even be removed from them, the beneficiaries of the system, to an independent committee. So, in as much as it may be legally possible for him to handle it alone, remember that Parliament has got an oversight duty to be able to look into the details of what the president is doing and correct him where he is wrong. So that is already in process. They are challenging that, and I hope a good outcome will come out of that. And I just want to add here that when you are preparing a book such as the handbook, this ministerial handbook and any other book, I think you need to have benchmarks. And I have a recommendation to say, can we not benchmark with Sweden? You know, the Mail and Guardian in May 2019 published an article about this very matter that we're discussing. And I'd like to quote one sentence, just one sentence from their article. It says there, without official cars or private drivers, Swedish ministers and MPs travel in crowded buses and trains, just like the citizens they represent. So we need to be careful that when we model our ministerial handbook and every other handbook, we model against countries that show equality among human beings, equality among citizens, respect for the citizens, that also have got no unemployment. Sweden believes in full employment of all the workers in Sweden, and so on and so forth. Rather than following rapacious capitalist countries, imperialists and colonialists, who exploit their own people and go beyond their borders to exploit others elsewhere.
Yeah. Matthew, should President Cyril Ramaphosa call for, dare I say, people I'm sure will fall off their chairs, a commission of inquiry into the abuse of the ministerial handbook?
I don't think we need any commissions of inquiry to do it. It's simply common sense. And I think one agrees with Sandile wholeheartedly. In fact, we hope you can sign up for COSATU. I think this proposal is simple. It's just simple. We must do what is right. We must cut these perks. It's unacceptable. Society is exhausted by it. We think we need to take this thing out of the choice, because right now you have a commission for the remuneration of public office bearers. They've been very sweetheart on politicians. They also cover judges as well, who also equally been very vociferous, demanding high perks for themselves. It then goes to the president. The president then makes a recommendation to Parliament. So the problem is you're having people who've got a vested interest in the game deciding for themselves what is their salaries, what is their perks, etc. Yeah. It needs to be removed from them. We think also that there's a legal limbo currently right now, because we don't think in law these perks are provided for. That could put us into a very difficult grey area. So we think there's a need for Parliament to draft legislation, put it out of their hands, put it solely in the hands of an independent commission. There must be some sort of public scrutiny, public accountability, because right now we stumbled across the society, the revisions in Ministerial Handbook last year completely by chance, because a researcher somehow managed to get her hands on it. Otherwise, none of us would have known about it. It would be completely secret, and we'll be none the wiser to how people are living large at the expense of taxpayers. But I think Sandile is right. The philosophical premise must be around modesty. It must be around service to the nation, and it can't be around this exaggerated sense of lifestyle, sense of entitlement. Many of our politicians across political parties often feel they're entitled to these benefits, and they're not. Yeah. At the same time, when the very nurses ask for a simple increase with inflation to protect their small little salaries, often about 5% of what ministers earn, then there's an outcry from political parties again across the political party establishment saying, no, public servants shouldn't get paid a living wage. They should be paid peanuts. So I think we need to have a reconfiguration, repivoting of our moral basis. Otherwise, people are simply going to get irritated more, and you're going to get a sense of greater alienation from the political establishment, and that's going to create huge problems for South Africa's sustainability going forward.
So if we do find such an independent body, how do we decide what they are worth? I mean, if for example, the transport system is in shambles, then I suppose it goes on a scale that goes down. If the policing is up to no good, then it goes on a scale that goes down.
That could be an interesting discussion. That could be a very, exciting debate to have, because you find in many government institutions, many companies in the private sector, you do have a performance-based system where if you work hard, you get a healthy above inflation increase. If you're mediocre, you might just get an inflation increase. If you don't do well, you might get no increase. You might even get into trouble. And so that could be an interesting discussion to say to ministers who presided over the collapse of Metro Rail, or ministers who've allowed the deterioration of public hospitals to be held accountable, and perhaps no increase. That could be a very positive discussion. I think it could even be better to say, can we make public this score sheet for ministers, for premiers, for MECs, for mayors? Allow the public to make comment and have those people being removed, because it's one thing to say, no, fine, no increase for this minister, they're useless. But perhaps a better option is simply to say, well, this minister thought it makes sense to have a 22 million rand flagpole, or this minister thought it makes sense to donate R1 billion to some English soccer team. Simply just remove them. That could be a more effective way of fixing the political system, which is quite dysfunctional, and rebuilding a proper sense of public service amongst our politicians.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's wishful thinking, Tato Swana, on our part. We're still waiting for the performance agreements, and probably this would be something that would need to go in there and certainly be evaluated from time to time.
Yes, the issue of performance evaluation and performance auditing, by the way, the AGSA has got a performance auditing function which they perform, but that information is not actually added up to the point of saying, yes, all these entities that are under your control, Minister so and so, have performed in terms of performance auditing up to this point, therefore your total score is at this level. Also, in terms of your performance agreement tied to the manifesto or whatever it was, or that was the basis of saying this is what we are going to deliver, then we have achieved this much. But bear in mind at the same time that some of the publications, including newspapers, have published scores of these ministers, because we know what they've promised. So you can tick a box to say, this is what you've promised. Most of our ministers at this point in time are including the state president and the previous deputy president. The two of them scored 40% in some of the scorecards. It's difficult to find a minister who scores about 50. I think I saw about 3 who scored about 50 in some of the scorecards that I saw. So we know that they are not performing, and therefore the state president may be prudently, because he doesn't use performance management and performance measures to promote or to retain people. So it's better for him for now to hide the scorecards of these people, even if they did exist.
I appreciate you both. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. That is Sandile Swana and Matthew Parks helping us in that conversation. Let's take this final WhatsApp message, 072-110-5584 from Bashir in Lenasia, saying, good evening, Thabo. It's time the fat cats ministers take a permanent leave. A total waste of time and money while the rest of South Africans go hungry. They get everything of the best. This government is a total failure. They should feel ashamed of themselves. ANC, next elections, you are history. That's Bashir out in Lenasia.